Is it working? Yeah. Okay. So it's working.
Okay.
So we talked before, and so how did the Pacer guys get together? How did that whole thing start? Go way back.
How far do you want to go back?
Let's start at the beginning.
Okay. The beginning started in Tektronix.
Okay.
We had a group with cubicles,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of the guys had sports cars and were avid sports cars drivers.
Real cars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Porsche, Sprites, all those old cars.
Uh-huh.
And then one day, the guy with the Porsche said, I can beat anybody here in slot cars.
Uh-huh.
Just come over to my apartment and we'll have a race. So we went over and went on his Strombecker track,
Uh-huh.
which is just a figure 8, push button controls, no brakes, no variable,
Uh-huh.
and he whipped us.
About what year was that?
Probably about 1962.
Okay.
So, as we were all leaving his place, going out to our cars in the parking lot, we were talking to one another, and we said, we're going to go out and buy a single car, Strombecker, from the hobby shops, and we're going to beat him. We didn't.
About how many guys were there?
Oh, probably 10.
10. Oh, wow. Okay, so there's quite a few.
So, after a while, some of the guys bought their own kits.
Uh-huh.
And because they were about $25.
Uh-huh.
And pretty soon we were sticking the two kits together and having a pretty good sized tracks.
Okay.
But of course, it's only 2 lane.
Right. Right.
And then we got a call. One of the guys got a call from a guy way on the other end of Tektronix. I don't know how he knew about us, but he said, how would you guys like to come race on a routed 3-lane track?
Uh-huh.
And that was Lee Dundas.
So at that time, Lee already had a routed track.
Yes, up in his attic.
Was he racing with some other guys, or?
I don't know who he's racing with.
Okay.
So after that, we started a Tektronix only club.
Uh-huh.
But then we found out there are more tracks in Portland.
Uh-huh.
And we started racing on some of those at a team race.
Uh-huh. So were these like other private tracks before the
Yeah.
commercial stuff even came
Yes.
in? Okay.
There was one in Hollywood, it's a 4-lane track. It's pretty nice.
Uh-huh.
And a hobby shop. And there was one in Oregon City that was 220 feet, a 4-lane track.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Let me think for a minute here.
And this was probably still before the big commercial 8-lane tracks
Yes.
came in?
Then the commercial tracks came in all over town. Just pop, 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 pop like popcorn.
Wow.
Bang, 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 bang. There's almost one every block, it seemed like.
Yeah.
And then I got out of slot car racing for about 7 years.
Uh-huh.
And then the fuel thing came along in 1973.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I thought, okay, I'm not going to be able to ski anymore or ride my motorcycle anymore. So I thought I'd build a 3-lane track in my garage.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, neighbors said that, yeah, I'd like the race, but they all faded away.
Were you still working at Tektronix then?
No, no, I had quit Tektronix a couple of years before that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had my daughter in a Montessori school at a church, and when they went to pick her up, and I ran into Gear Loose.
Uh-huh. So did you know him from, you knew him from racing before, right?
He was a friend of Lee Dundas's,
Oh, okay.
and Lee brought Gear Loose and a guy they called Three Fingers to, and the rest of us were all from the same area,
Uh-huh.
Tektronix.
Okay.
But then I asked Gear Loose, would you like to start racing slot cars? Oh, yeah. I didn't have anybody to race with.
Yeah.
And so he came out and started racing. And I thought, well, if he would come out and race, I ought to call Lee Dundas and see if he's interested.
Yeah.
And he said, sure, Bob. So then we had about 4 people racing.
So at that time, had Lee kind of got out of it too?
Yeah, because he had moved
Uh-huh.
from Portland or Lake Oswego out to his farm on that road to Newburgh.
Oh, out there in Wilsonville. Okay.
Yeah.
Where he had the barn.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So then,
a guy called, I don't know how he got in touch with us, but he had bought a track from Vancouver. It was a 4-lane small track with all kinds of decorations, mountains and everything,
uh-huh.
with plaster Paris.
Uh-huh.
And it was out on northeast Portland. Ken Bryant was his name.
Ken Brandt?
Bryant, I don't know how to spell the last name,
I'll guess.
the D or T.
Okay.
And we raced there for a while, and he named it PASER.
Oh, okay. So that's where the Pacer name came from.
Portland Area Scale Electric Racing or something.
Well, I had heard, and maybe Gossett told me, but I heard originally it was PACER,
It was,
and then you guys changed it to PASER.
that's correct.
Okay.
And I don't know what the C stood for. Controlled, I think. or
Yeah, I think that's what Gary told me. It was
Yeah.
Portland area controlled.
Electric Racing.
Yeah, I think that was it. And then, so when you guys changed it to PASER, it was still Portland area.
It was flipping back and forth.
Oh, okay.
We kind of said, okay, we're going to go with this. And that's why it stood since then.
Okay, so is that Portland area scale electric racing?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I've actually seen copies of old rule pamphlets that you guys made up, and I've seen them both ways. I've seen it PACER and I've
That
seen
was when it was
it
flipping
PASER.
back and forth.
Okay. All right. So that 4-lane track, is that the one that ended up in Lee's attic of his
Yes.
barn?
Yeah, Lee
Okay.
bought it from him.
Okay.
He had to move to Spokane, and he's still racing up there.
You were telling me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Lee said when you guys moved that track over to his barn, you actually had to take the siding
All
off to
siding
get it
off.
up there.
It took us about 10 people to lift that thing. Oh, that thing, with all that plaster Paris in it, was so heavy.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah,
And that was, I looked at that track one time, and that was like, I want to say that was 3/4 inch plywood,
could be. Yeah,
because it wasn't MDF and it wasn't particle board. It was
No.
plywood.
yeah.
Yeah. So, was that the first track that went up there? Was that before
That
he
was
built the
second
big one?
That was the second one.
He'd already built the big one, the big
Yes,
3-lane.
Yes. When I moved, I had to get rid of my track in my basement, or in that garage,
Uh-huh.
and he bought it for me
Uh-huh.
and moved it out, and then it sat for a couple of years.
Uh-huh.
And then he put that up in his hayloft,
Uh-huh.
and then cut the ends off of it.
Uh-huh.
And then those big sweepers at the ends were both, he put that in plywood where the rest of it was particle board.
Okay. So just that little tight infield section was your old track.
That's it, yeah.
And then the big sweeper on the right and the big bank way down on the left, he added all that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
And then he bought that track from Ken Bryant when he moved.
Uh-huh.
And we got it up there, and so we had 2 tracks.
Yeah, then that's where I first raced with you guys, was up there. So about what year was it, you think, when you guys put those 2 tracks in?
I can't tell you for sure, but I'm going to say around in 1980.
Oh, okay.
That's a big guess.
Okay. So you guys raced quite a while then,
Yes, we did.
with
Yeah.
nothing up there, like what,
And
73 to
no heat,
80
and no
or so.
heat.
And no heat, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. He had a wood stove up there when I went up
Finally,
there.
yes. And that, well, we also put visqueens all over the walls to keep
I remember that because he had the
cracks in the
bugs.
walls about that thick.
Yeah.
And the wind has come right on through it.
I remember seeing the bugs laying in that visqueen.
Yeah, yeah.
Those flying things. Now you were telling me before that you raced at someplace over there on Burnside, downtown Portland.
That was a commercial track,
Yeah,
a big commercial track.
and I remember you telling me what the name of it was, and I don't remember.
Uptown Raceway.
Uptown. Yeah, because one other guy that contacted me about racing, in fact, he came over here and bought a bunch of cars to race with the nasty guys, and I haven't seen him since. But he was talking about that Uptown Raceway, and he raced there all the time. He said he had trophies and stuff from there. But he said that was the big place he raced when he was younger.
I didn't race there very much.
Uh-huh.
That's when I quit racing.
Oh, okay, so that was before 73.
Yeah,
That was before you got back into it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, did you guys race much at all on the commercial raceways anywhere? Or?
Well, when I quit racing at Lee's, because he was a long ways away, I started racing a little bit at that first raceway in Beaverton,
Uh-huh.
but it was too commercial. And then they made an American raceway about 3 or 4 blocks away,
Uh-huh.
and I raced there for a little while.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to Uptown Raceway because they're going to have a big race, and I found out how slow I was, and I put all this energy into it. And as I packed my box and went home after going down there and practicing, I thought, box, I wonder if you're ever going to be opened again.
So, back then, were you guys scratch building everything? Or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
some of us were.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons that I quit, one of them was a divorce, and 2 of them, you can go out and just go in and buy stuff
Mm-hmm.
and actually beat the guys that are making their home, rewrapping the motors and taking all the time and everything.
Uh-huh.
And
But
that's-
that wasn't until the commercial raceways started
that's
springing
when
up,
first-
right?
Yeah,
So before that, you guys were probably scratch building everything because there was nothing, right?
that's it. Yeah, back in the days when we were racing at Lee's at first,
Uh-huh.
you had to build a car or you weren't going to race.
And what were you guys using for motors back then?
Pittman Motors, Lee Dennis was running a angle winder, Pittman, called a 704,
Uh-huh.
and cheating.
Yeah, I think I've heard that before.
He had it in a 32nd scale. I don't remember what it was, some kind of a car like an Aston Martin or something.
Yeah.
And his back tires stuck out because he couldn't pull them in any further, even though he had access to a machine shop. He
Yeah.
could do anything. And he would tech every day, and the guy that started all this, at Tektronix, would tech him. He said, "Lee, your tires are too wide. You can't. You're illegal." "Oh, I'll fix it next week." Never fixed them. Never.
That's pretty funny. So PASER's got to be about the oldest club still racing in Oregon, don't you
Oh,
think?
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. If you want to keep further on it, some guys that raced HO came up and started looking at Lee's track because they heard about it.
Uh-huh.
And that ended up being Pelican Park.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of guys like Glenn,
Yeah. Glenn started going out there with me.
quite a few guys, HO racers were started racing out there.
Yeah, because me and Al Blanchard and Glenn, I can't remember. Well, Dave Smith from Salem
Yeah,
was racing up there.
yeah,
And then I met Doug Haynes, who started Pelican Park. I met him HO racing.
mm-hmm,
He came up and was racing with us HO.
mm-hmm,
And then we went down to Eugene, raced his place, and he ended up buying that track that you helped me on,
yeah.
that we rebuilt in my garage there. But, yeah, the good old days. And that was probably early 80s,
Yeah,
82, 83 in there somewhere.
yeah.
So, how did Gearloose get his name? I've heard so many different renditions of this.
Okay, this is the real one.
Okay.
Okay. Lee's second track was in the basement of the house that he bought. He had to move from the house with the attic 3-lane track because Kelly Dundas came along.
Uh-huh.
He and Betty both had kids,
Uh-huh.
and they needed more room. So he bought a house closer to Lake Oswego, not too far off of Upper Boone's Ferry. And it was a 3-laner, but nicer than the other one. And we started allowing this guy to come in that was real old. Maybe he was in his 40s. Nice guy. And he would bring his daughter with him, who was a teenager.
Uh-huh.
Of course, back then we didn't have lap counters.
Uh-huh.
So somebody had to count or mark the laps down as the cars would go by.
Uh-huh.
And she was elected to do it. So one day she said, "Jerry, what's your real name?" And he says, "It's Gearoff." And she says, "I can't pronounce it. I'm going to call you Gear Loose."
And that's where it came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so I hear that you also gave Gary Gossett, Goose, his name, his nickname.
Yeah. I've done a lot of that.
And that was because it was from the baseball player?
Yeah. One of the best baseball player with all the, you heard about him all the time on radio and television,
Uh-huh.
was Goose Gossage, I think it was.
Yeah, yeah.
So I started calling him Goose because he goosed his finger. Goose Gossett.
That man, there's guys that race in the Nasty group, never knew what his real name was.
I'm surprised. He wasn't opposed to that name, so.
I think he liked it,
Yeah.
I remember, when I started posting the results, on the website and stuff, I put Gary Gossett on there. No, Goose. Just put Goose. So yeah, I think he liked that. It kind of got to be a funny thing because my wife Diane was working for Reynolds School District, and it was actually a duck, the Aflac duck. The guy that came around that was the representative for Aflac. My wife was the secretary in charge of benefits for the retirees, so they would always give her stuff. When they gave her one of those Aflac ducks, and she gave it to Goose for a Christmas present.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. Anyway, So, you think of anything else cool about the early days or anything? Any tidbits of facts or anything? Or
Oh, if I thought long enough, I'm sure I can come up with a lot of stuff.
I know Lee was always, when I started racing with you guys, he was always the motor guy. And I remember him taking me down in his shop, in his house there on the river one time, and he had all kinds of instruments and stuff for electric motors.
Yeah.
But he seemed to be quite the motor guy.
Well, he's quite the chassis guy too.
Yeah.
He's built some beautiful chassis.
Well, I know when I first started racing with you guys, you know, we raced Womps on that little track, and Lee had all the Womps. You know, you could buy one right there, and that's how you guys got me hooked. And then, of course, after that race, I saw the 124th cars, and I was like, I want one of those. You know, the model car bodies. But it seems to me at that time, you guys were running basically just flat brass pan chassis
We probably started off that way.
with 36D motors. I remember
we did.
that.
Yeah, because they're 98 cents at Radio Shack.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure the ones you guys were running weren't the 98-cent version.
Okay, well,
they've been massaged.
Along comes Hugh Ellsworth,
Okay.
and he was the motor man. And he had some 36Ds that were just unbelievable.
Yeah.
We started sticking Arco magnets in them, which they sent the can and the magnets together. And we put the armature in it, and then we started hopping up rerunning the armature. But Hugh was using a 5-pole armature, special wind, and he'd twist them. He had everything in him, and oof.
Yeah, he was quite a guy. And he did the first electric lap counting system I'd ever seen for you guys out there. I remember he had that big box and it had LED readouts for lap counting.
At Lee's?
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember now.
Yeah. That was the first electronics thing I'd seen. And then he started doing some computerized system for you guys too. I remember that. Because I was asking him about it, you know, because I wanted to do something for HO, and he had me get one of those Commodore computers, and he said that's all I needed, but I don't know, that's about the time I got divorced and kind of dropped out. Never got that done, but I remember him, you, and Lee Dundas, and I think Gearloose might have been there, came over to my place when I was putting that track back together, that 124th track. And I remember Hugh helped me do all the wiring on it. And I remember you working on that one corner that went under the overpass. Man, you must have worked on that for 3 or 4 nights, getting that thing all dialed in. And then Lee took one look at the track, and you know, the lanes all kind of came together in that one corner there before he came on the lower straight. And he said, before you do anything, you got to take that out. And he gave me the jig for the router to make the lanes equal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I bonded that in and redid that. But I remember you guys helped me a lot getting that track going. The good old days.
Yeah.
When did you start? You guys must have started. You went from the flat chassis to the hinged pans sometime after I kind of dropped out when I got divorced. So that must have been about 1990 or so.
That's probably about right, because Gearloose and I, and sometimes Lee and Glenn, we go down and race at Pelican Park in a team race or 4-man race. And they usually beat us. And I came home, and they're going to have a early model NASCAR race. So I had one of those 53 Studebakers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was the first time I attached a hinge pan on one.
Uh-huh.
And I completed it, ran it on my track in my basement. I called Gear Loose and I said, we're going to win the next race. And we did.
And that was your track in a lower, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that track. That was that 3-lane with a upper and the lower straight down the
Yeah.
back there.
Yeah.
That was a cool track.
It was a little difficult, a little too tight, but I didn't have a lot of space either.
Well, I remember racing on that, I don't know, maybe 2-3 times, something like that. I also remember Glenn and I going over to your house and you helping us build chassis. And at that time you were doing just a flat motor plate, and then the whole axle mount was all wire and tubing that you were putting in there. You had that special piece you had machined that fit over the armature shaft, and then your axle went through it so that it lined it perfectly.
I don't remember that.
Oh, you don't remember that? It was just a little block.
This is where the motor attached to the chassis.
Yeah, so you had the flat plate that you would screw to the motor and set on your soldering block, and then you had this little square block that had a hole through it that would slip over the armature shaft, and it perfectly aligned the axle.
Yeah. Well, Steve Smith was making those. You take a strip of brass.
Uh-huh.
That was the right thickness up, not thickness this way, but that way.
Right.
And he would punch the 2 holes and then the big hole for the motor. And we cut those up.
Oh, okay.
And that block I stuck on it, Gear Loose had a friend that worked in a machine shop, and he made that precise.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that was back then that was a big deal getting it precise.
Yeah.
That was quite a machining achievement to be able to do that.
Yeah. The guy had to make a couple of them because the first couple of them didn't come out straight.
Huh.
And as Gear Loose said, he's got all the equipment here and everything else, and he's a professional. But he finally got it right.
Huh, wow. Doesn't seem like it'd be that tough, but evidently it was.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah. Huh.
And then Kurt came out with that motor mount that did Kurt Smith.
Yeah, the little machined, the milled brass one, the big heavy one.
That makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. I see Professor Motor has those, but somebody was telling me that they're not very precise.
Well, they copied him.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. You look at the picture on his site, and
They
it looks
copied him.
almost identical.
Several people copied him, and it really hurt Kurt.
Yeah.
Bob in Roseburg copied him. But Bob did call him up and say, I don't have any. You have some? Because he was kicking out these chassis like mad.
Right.
And I think Captain said, no, I don't have any now. So he went ahead and made a copy of it. And it's not nearly as good as Captain's.
Oh, really? Huh. I probably still got a couple of those somewhere.
Hang on to them.
Yeah, so you're telling me.
Yeah.
Whenever I find my stuff, I'll probably find them. Boxes and boxes up there. It's a nightmare. Anyway. So I want to hear about, tell me about your motocross days, too. I want to hear that story again. That blew me away when you told me that you brought motocross to Portland.
Oregon.
Oregon.
At Tektronix, we kind of started a motorcycle club, but it was open to anybody in the area. And it was called Slow Spokes. And we went through a whole bunch of different events to have, like I think it was called the Tire Climb. That's where you have a drag race with two bikes up a hill instead of just a hill climb. You're
Oh.
racing against a guy. And they had a kids' field day and all those kind of stuff, and finally they ran out of things to come up with. And they said, anybody have any ideas? And I said, yeah, motocross. Huh?
Well, didn't you get invited somewhere to attend one first?
The guys from Portland that race flat track were invited up to Nanaimo, BC to race on a closed golf course. And a nice big sweeping. I didn't want to race. I always kept away from racing. But I knew the guys that were going up there. And so my wife and I and some of the wives of the racers all went up there, and I watched this motocross race. I thought, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And the next year, I did enter the race for 3/4 of a lap. And I still don't know why I crashed.
Yeah.
Right on the flat. And all of a sudden, I'm bam, bam, bam. I bet this guy's, the guy lent me his motorcycle, the 100cc twin Yamaha that he had hopped up, and I bent the tank. I really feel bad about it, but then he ruined my motorcycle, so he said, that's even, Bob. Anyway, that's why I first saw for 2 years I saw motocross, and then I told these guys about it, and I said, yeah, and then one of the guys at the club said, I live in Helvetia and I got a farm. He said, you can use the land.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of us go up there and cleared part of his land. He had a canyon in the middle. We had to fall the trees. It went down and then right up again. But that was the first race. And the second race, one of my guys that I work with at Tektronix lived with his mother-in-law and father-in-law in Pumpkin Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a farm. And so he said that my in-laws will rent the property, but you're going to have to do some clearing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a much bigger place, and we did have to clear some forest out, and that became the first racetrack, really. But all they had was under 250s and over 250s.
Mm-hmm.
And for the big bikes, the 650s and 500s all lined up like this, they had to go through about a 10-foot area. And one guy out here got there first, and big wreck, and he died.
Oh.
And
That's not good.
I'm not going to be around this anymore, so I quit completely.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. Huh. About what year was that? That must have been way back too then, huh?
Late 60s.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I remember first time I ever saw dirt bikes was, remember where the Sandy Boulevard drive-in was? You ever come out this way?
Where was it?
It was on, well, it's where 205 goes through under Sandy Boulevard now. There used to be a drive-in movie theater there. And next to it was a big field. And I remember coming home from my grandparents' house on Columbia Boulevard. It would come up to Sandy Boulevard, and there'd just be hundreds of bikes in that field. Everybody just running around, you know. It's just crazy, you know. But that was the first time I ever saw dirt bikes. But that was probably about, it was probably a little bit earlier than that. That was probably about 64, something like that. But yeah, I remember when dirt bikes were big. I mean, any field just outside of the city limits, there was people riding dirt bikes.
Oh yeah, I used to practice and work on or check out my dirt bike. It was on the peninsula of St. John's.
Oh.
they used to have a garbage dump place,
Yeah, I know what a garbage dump was.
landfill,
Yeah.
and they filled it in, and then the motorcycles started riding around on it.
Okay, I remember guys running around out there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
I used to go to that dump all the time with my grandfather.
yeah, I was the only one around, I think.
Yeah, I remember that. There was a big place out there guys used to ride.
Yeah,
Now it's all those industrial buildings out there.
right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I know what you're talking about. That was right off Columbia Boulevard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I know exactly where that was. Wow, I forgot about that place out there. Huh. Well, let's see if my tape recorder worked. I started listening and not taking notes. Let's see. It's still on. I think we're good. How do I stop it?